Okay. All right. Again, page 958 in the art scroll, page 967 in the Steinsaltz. So obviously we're studying Parshas Vaeschanan, and by way of introduction, I would just recall our discussion of Parshas Devarim, where we talked about how, Chazal, the rabbis, see the book of Devarim as a Mishnah Torah, and which is commonly understood as a review or a repetition of the Torah, of the first 4 books of the 5 books of the Torah. But we noted, of course, that it's not a repetition per se. And what I'd like to discuss this morning is some significant omissions from this supposed review of the Torah, and the meaning of those omissions, and how the meaning of those omissions are reflected in Parshas Vaeschanan in particular. The inspiration for this class came a lot from a book that I'm reading. The book is called Haneum Ha'acharon Shel Moshe, by Professor Micha Goodman in Israel. This book is a fabulous book. The title is The Final Speech of Moshe, which it's an analysis of Seifer Devarim, the final speech of Moshe. Some of you may recognize Professor Goodman. He wrote a very popular book on the Moreh Nevuchim, on the Rambam's Guide to the Perplexed, which was a bestseller in Israel. It was read by Jews across the spectrum and raised some very, very fascinating ideas. And he also wrote a book on the Kuzari. He writes articles. He's a professor, and he wrote this book as well, which I'm reading right now, and it's really, really fascinating. And it's given me a lot to think about when it comes to the book of Devarim. So in one of the earlier chapters, actually in the first chapter, he discusses how Mishnah Torah, the book of Devarim, which is, again, supposed to be a review of the Torah, according to many, leaves out really significant portions of the Torah. We mentioned last week that many, if not all, of the stories of Seifer Bereshis are left out. What Professor Goodman discusses in one chapter is how the entire corpus, the almost entire corpus of the Corbanot, of the offerings in the Mishkan and the Beit HaMikdash are left out. If you look at Seifer Vayikra and how much of the beginning of Seifer Vayikra is devoted to a detailed presentation of the Corbanot and the laws of the Corbanot, and the laws of how the Corbanot are offered, all of that is left out. Virtually all of that is left out in the book of Devarim. And clearly we need to understand why. And if we understand why, it'll help us understand some of Moshe's primary goals, or Moshe's primary goal in the presentation of Seifer Devarim. Right? If we look at Seifer Devarim as a long speech, an oration, or a series of speeches given by Moshe, so what is Moshe's bottom line? What's his main point? By thinking about the fact that he left out the Corbanot, we can understand better what his main point, what his goal is in this speech. And obviously, if we're looking at this speech, we have to look at it in context, and we mentioned this last week, and that is that this is Moshe's final soliloquy, his final message to the Jewish people before his death. He knows he's not going into the land of Canaan. He knows that this people will go on and will settle the land without him. And so he is giving a speech. He is giving a presentation of the Torah with a message that is tailored to this particular critical juncture where the Jewish people are going to transition away from Moshe to a new leader, Yehoshua, and to other leaders, and to life without him. And the one of the observations that Professor Goodman makes is that the tone of many of Moshe's comments throughout the book of Devarim, the tone is one of warning, one of caution, that as Moshe is preparing the Jewish people for life in the land of Canaan, he is warning them about certain things they have to be careful about, certain things that they have to watch out for. So I'd like to begin reading our Parsha. I'm going to read more psukim than I normally do, so please bear with me. But I think it'll be helpful to get a sense of what Moshe is warning about, how he's framing his comments, and then we'll go back to this observation that the Corbanot are left out. So if we begin at the beginning of Parshas Vaeschanan, which is Perek Gimel, Pasuk Chaf Gimel. Again, 967 in the Steinsaltz, 958 in the Art Scroll. So it begins first with a reflection on the fact that Moshe did request to be allowed into the land of Canaan. Vaeschanan el Hashem ba'isa lemor. I pleaded with Hashem at that time, saying, Hashem Elokim atoh hachilosa leharos es avdecha es gadlecha ve'es yadcha hachazaka. You began to show your servant, you began to show me your greatness and your mighty hand. Asher mi el bashamayim u'v'aretz asher yaseh k'ma'asecha v'vorosecha. That who is a God in the heavens or on the earth who can perform like your actions and like your mighty deeds? Hashem, I saw firsthand, especially in Egypt, right? Yadcha hachazaka, that's a reference to Egypt. I saw in Egypt how much, Hashem, you are capable of. You're capable of anything. And so therefore I ask you, Abra naver es arsatova. So within your capabilities, can you see fit to allow me to go into this land? Asher be'ever nahar hatov hazev halvanon, which Moshe describes with some poetic language. Vayisaber Hashem bi lema'anchem v'lo shama elai. Hashem was angry with me because of you, and we're not going to get into that because of you and that wonderful Jewish guilt. V'lo shama elai, and Hashem did not listen to me. Vayomer Hashem elai rav loch al tosef deber elai od b'davar hazeh. That's enough from you. I don't want to hear you speaking about this anymore. Hashem's mind is made up, as it were. Alei, go up, rosh hapiska v'sa einecha. Right, so go up to the peak and lift up your eyes. You'll see, you look in all directions and see that you're not going to cross over this Jordan River. You shall command Yehoshua and strengthen and encourage him. Yehoshua is going to finish the job. Vaneshav Bagai Mul Beis Pa'or, and we were sitting in the canyon opposite Beit Pa'or, where we know the very tragic things happened. So this is sort of a prelude to a speech which begins in the next pasuk, the next chapter, chapter 4, that Moshe is giving. So Moshe's messages are framed by the fact that are introduced with the clear reality that Moshe is not taking them in. We know that, but Moshe references this in order to emphasize that these are messages for a people that he will not be going with. Ve'ata Yisrael, chapter 4, verse 1. Ve'ata Yisrael, shma el hachukim ve'el mishpatim. Right? Ve'ata, and now, which is a pretty innocuous word, but it's an important word because it's a transition word. I told you why I'm not going in, and now this is what I want to tell you. Ve'ata Yisrael, shma el hachukim ve'el mishpatim. Listen to the chukim and the mishpatim asher nochim elamed eschem lasos that I am teaching you to do. Leman tichyu uvasem v'rishtem es haaretz. So you're about to enter into the land without me. I'm going to give you instructions on how to thrive. Leman tichyu, that you shall not just live but thrive. And take possession of this land. Do not add to what I'm instructing you, and do not take away. Right? The Torah that I'm presenting to you is perfect. There's nothing to be added, nothing to be subtracted. Which is perhaps why Moshe just referenced Mul Beis Pa'or, because he wants to reflect on the fact that they saw what Hashem did in Baal Por. Right? So the most immediate event that Moshe could reference to give instruction is Baal Peor. And here is the first language of warning that we get in this speech. It doesn't have some of the classical language of warning, which we'll see in a few moments, but the fact that Moshe, at the very beginning of his speech, is referencing Baal Peor, a terribly tragic event in which the Jewish people worshipped Avodah Zarah, is clearly meant to prepare them for the land of Canaan by referencing this event and its lessons. It is a warning. And you who cleave to Hashem, you chayim kulchem hayom. You live, you thrive. Again, that word chayim, like before in verse 1, Laman tichyu, right? Moshe is talking to them about how to live life in the land of Canaan. And the way to live life in the land of Canaan, the land of Israel that Hashem is giving them, is to heed these warnings. Let's continue. See that I have taught you that Hashem commanded me. Lasos kain bekerev haaretz asher atem ba'im shama l'rishta. That you should perform them in the midst of the land that you are coming to inherit. So again, these are words which make perfect sense. It's not strange language, but it's very important language. Bekerev haaretz. Moshe is clarifying for the Jewish people what will enable them to be in the land. What sort of mitzvos they have to follow while they're in the land. Why? Let's continue reading. You should keep the mitzvos because they are your wisdom and your understanding in the eyes of the nations. Because they will hear these chukim and they will say, Rak am chacham v'navon hagoy gadol hazeh. Ki mi goy gadol asher lo elohim krovim elav, kashem elokeinu b'chol koreinu elav, and so on and so forth. So there's something about the Torah that we are supposed to represent to the other nations. But now I want to look at verse 9, Pasuk Tes, because here he stops himself. Rak. Now, rak in modern Hebrew means only, but in biblical Hebrew, according to some, it means but. Rak, but, or just, right? Hishamer lecha ushmor nafshecha me'od. And here we get the first of many instances of language of warning that Moshe is warning the Jewish people of things. Hishamer lecha ushmor nafshecha me'od pentishkach esadrim asher ru'einecha. Right? Watch yourselves carefully, lest you forget the things that your eyes saw. Right? And should they leave your heart, right, during your time, and instead, and so therefore you should teach them to your children and your children's children, right? So make sure you don't forget these things and pass them on to your future generations. What are they supposed to remember? What are they supposed to make sure not to forget? The day you stood before Hashem on Chorev, Maimed Har Sinai, the giving of the Torah. So Moshe is warning the Jewish people not to forget the giving of the Torah. According to the Ramban, this is actually a mitzvah. There is a mitzvah to remember Maimed Har Sinai, just like there's a mitzvah to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim. But I don't want to focus on that. I want to focus on the warnings. And he goes on to describe the experience at Har Sinai and the fact that all they heard was a voice. Look at verse 12. Pasuk Yud Beis, Vayidaber Hashem elechem mitoch ha'esh. Hashem spoke to you from the fire. Kol Devarim atem shomim. You heard a voice of Devarim. Utmuna inchem roim zulasiko. And you saw no image aside from the kol. And this is going to be important. I mean, we already talked about the significance of Devarim in last week's class. The words, these are the words of Moshe. But here, this concept of Devarim comes up again, but here in the context of Hashem. That what Hashem presented on Har Sinai was not a visual experience, it was an auditory experience. Thank you. An auditory experience. They heard Devarim. Ve'aged lachem es briso, and Hashem told you His covenant. Asher tzivah eschem lasos aser sa'advarim ve'echtavim al shnei luchos avanim, and they were put on the 2 luchos. But let's skip to verse Tesvav, pasuk 15. V'nishmartem me'od l'nafsho seichem. Again, another warning. V'nishmartem me'od l'nafsho seichem, with the same language as the last warning. The last warning in verse 9 was rak hishamer lecha u'shmor nafshecha, protect your nefesh. Here in verse 15, the same thing. What should you be careful about? You have to be very careful that you retain the authenticity of that experience. And the authenticity of that experience was an auditory experience. What's authentic about Ma'amad Har Sinai was not what they saw, but what they heard. Yes, they saw things. They saw the fire. They saw Moshe go up. Yes, but when it comes to the relationship with Hashem, it's critically important that remember that the most important thing is not what they saw, but what they heard. The Devarim that they heard, the Aseres HaDibros. And so again, we have this language of warning, and it's warning to retain the authenticity of the experience. I want to skip now to verse 23, Pasuk Chav Gimel, because the warnings continue. Hishamru lachem pen tishkechu es bris Hashem Elokechem asher karas imachem. Again, hishamru lachem, watch yourselves. Another warning, right? Not to forget the covenant that Hashem made with you. Vasisem lachem pesel tunas kol asher tzivcha Hashem Elokecha, Hashem Elokecha eish ochlahu elkanah. And if you forget your covenant, you're going to make idols. You're going to worship your idols. You're going to worship things that you see, which is obviously not just a violation of Avodah Zarah, it's missing the whole point of the auditory experience of Ma'amad Har Sinai. So here we get a series of warnings, all revolving around the retelling of the story of Ma'amad Har Sinai. And then let's go to an even more powerful warning. Now the warnings intensify, and that's verse 25. And what's so important about verse 25 in chapter 4? I'm on page 973 in the Steinsaltz and page 962 at the bottom in the Art Scroll. What's so important about this is that we are about to read this. We're going to read this on Thursday. We read this on Tisha B'Av. Ki solid banim uvnei banim from this week's Parsha is also what we read on Tisha B'Av. So clearly there's something in this Parsha that is important for a day like Tisha B'Av. So let's read a little more. I know I'm reading a lot, but there's important observations to be made before we then go further. So verse 25, Pasuk Chavei, Ki solid banim uvnei banim v'noshantem ba'aretz. When you have children and children's children, v'noshantem ba'aretz, and you will have been long on the land. You'll be very settled, very accustomed to being there. V'hishchatem, and you will become corrupt. V'asisem pesel tmunas kol, and you will create idols. V'asisem rabbi Hashem Elokecha la'achisem, you will do bad, you will do evil in the eyes of God to anger Him. Ha'idosi b'chem hayom. I call today to the as Hashemayim v'asaretz, to the heavens and the earth, ki avod tovedun moher, that you will be utterly eradicated from the land quickly. That you're about to take possession. You will not be long. You will not have length of days on the land, because you will be destroyed. You will be dispersed amongst the nations. You will be few amongst the nations that Hashem will lead you towards. And not only that, and you're going to continue to worship Avodah Zarah even there. And you're going to call out to Hashem, and Hashem is going to be merciful towards you, and Hashem will redeem you, and Hashem will bring you back. This is the ultimate warning. This is the ultimate warning, the central warning of the book of Devarim. And that is that as the Jewish people are going to say goodbye to Moshe and cross the Jordan and enter into the land, they need to make sure that they retain their relationship with Hashem and not forget how to worship Hashem and become corrupt and worship Avodah Zarah. And if they do that, they will be quickly removed off the land. And what Micha Goodman observes is that this is a very strange kind of pep talk. If Moshe is preparing the Jewish people to enter into the land of Canaan, why is he focusing so much on what's going to get them kicked out? Practically, we understand, right? Practically, he's giving them very, very practical advice. This is you're taking possession of the land. Do you want to know how to retain possession of the land? To retain possession of the land, don't worship Avodah Zarah. Make sure you remain committed to the Torah and to Hashem, to the authenticity of the message of Maimon Har Sinai, and you do not fashion idols and worship Avodah Zarah. And what Micha Goodman observes is that, it's strange that they haven't even gotten to the land yet, and Moshe's already warning them about what will happen and how they'll get thrown off. Right? They're not even there yet, and they're already being told this is how you're going to get thrown off. And so what Micha Goodman suggests is that clearly the real challenge for the Jewish people will not be taking possession of the land. The real challenge will be retaining possession of the land. And it's exactly like that pasuk in Tehillim, right? Tehillim Chav Zayin, I believe. Mi aleh behar Hashem, or Chav Dalet. Now I'm forgetting. Chav Dalet, I think. Mi aleh behar Hashem, umi yakum imkom kadsho. Right? Who can ascend the mount of God? Umi yakum, and who can stay on the mount of God? Right? It's one thing to get up the mountain. It's another thing to stay on the mountain. And so what we see here is that Moshe is telling them that taking possession of the land will not be a challenge. Hashem's going to fight for you. Hashem's going to wipe out the 7 nations. You will have, relatively speaking, not so much trouble in taking possession of the land. There will be some trouble, but that's not the primary challenge. The primary challenge is not going to be settling in the land of Israel. The primary challenge is going to be staying in the land of Israel. And that's the message that Moshe is trying to instill within them. That the work starts much more so once they get there. Right? Going into the land will be easy compared to being able to stay in the land. That's the real challenge. And so what Moshe is addressing is what will enable Bnei Israel to retain possession of the land. That's the message of Seifer Devarim. Seifer Devarim, which is a Mishnah Torah, it's a review of the Torah, but not really a review because it leaves a lot of stuff out, is what I would call a carefully curated presentation of what will enable the Jewish people to retain the land of Israel. You know, I'm thinking for those of you who are familiar with Seinfeld, there's a very funny Seinfeld in which Jerry rents a car, and he gets to the rental car counter, and they said, "Oh, sorry, we don't have any more cars." And Jerry's like, "Well, I have a reservation." Right? She's like, "Yeah, I'm sorry, but we don't have any more cars." He's like, "I don't think you understand what a reservation is. You know, it's one thing to take the reservation, but the real challenge is to hold on to the reservation." It's not an exact quote, but that chakira, that distinction that Seinfeld made in that famous scene, is very much what we're talking about here. It's one thing to take possession of the land. It's a whole different matzah ball. It's a whole different thing to retain, to keep possession of the land. That's the real challenge, and that's what Moshe is trying to teach the Jewish people with Seifer Devarim. And so all the different instances throughout Seifer Devarim of where we have language of warning, Hishamer lecha, Hishamer lecha es nafsh, right? Ushmartem es nafshe. I'm sorry. Rak Hishamer lecha ushmor nafshecha. Right? Watch yourself and watch your soul. all those instances where it says something to that effect, something like that, it's coming to warn the Jewish people of something they're probably not thinking about. They're thinking about taking possession of the land. Moshe is trying to get them to see further into the future and learn what's going to be the more difficult challenge, which is retaining the land. And that requires a whole series of warnings. And that's what Moshe is trying to do. And so now that we understand the approach of Moshe and what he's trying to accomplish, now let's go back and think about the Corbanos for a second. Right? So the Corbanos are they're mitzvos, and as such, they're no more or less important than any other mitzvah. But as important as they are, when it comes to building a society that deserves to remain on the land, which is what Moshe is trying to help them understand, it seems like the Corbanot don't figure as prominently. They have to be maintained. They have to be observed. They're in the Torah. But Moshe does not include them in this speech, in these warnings of Seifer Devarim, because the Corbanos themselves don't necessarily play a role in the message that Moshe is trying to deliver. They don't necessarily play a role in what it means to retain the land of Israel. And that's Moshe's implicit message. Moshe's implicit message is, if you want to stay on the land, of course you have to keep the Corbanos, but understand that the significance of the Corbanos and what they represent should not be misunderstood and overestimated to the exclusion of other things which will keep you in the land. And what Moshe says implicitly, the Navi Yeshaya says explicitly. And this is another one of the insights of Professor Micha Goodman in the book I'm reading, that later prophets sometimes amplify messages from earlier prophets. Moshe is clearly an earlier prophet, and he is he's sending an implicit message about Corbanos and where they are important and where they are less important. And the Navi Yeshaya picks up that message and makes it explicitly. And where does he make that message explicit? The Haftorah from this past Shabbos Chazon, the first parak of the Navi Yeshaya. If you take a look in your Chumashim at last week's Haftorah, the art scroll, it's page 1195. And in the Steinsaltz Chumash, it's page 1255. And in this is the Haftorah for Shabbos Chazon, the Shabbos that always falls right before Tisha B'Av, Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amotz. And if you look at Pasuk Yud Aleph, verse 11, or let's start with Pasuk 10, right? Pasuk 10, verse 10 in this Haftorah. Again, 1195 in the art scroll, 1255 in the Steinsaltz. Shimu Devar Hashem Ketzine Sidom. Ha'azinu Toras Elokeinu Am Amorah. Right. So listen, you leaders of Sodom. That's not a nice thing to say, right? He's speaking critically to the Jewish people that have become corrupt. Pasuk Yud Aleph. Lama li rov zivchechem. What do I need with your many offerings, your many korbanos? Yomar Hashem, says Hashem. Savati olos elim v'chelev miri'im. Savati, I am sated. I've had enough. I've had enough with the burnt offerings of rams and the fat of fattened bulls. Right? I do not desire the blood of bulls and sheep and goats. When you come to see me, right? Who sought this from your hand, trampling my courtyards? Right? I don't want your korbanos, Hashem says. Pasuk Yud Gimel, verse 13. Lo sosifu havi minchas shav ketoras toeva hili. Chodesh v'shabas kiro mikra lo uchal oven v'atzara. Do not continue bringing a vain meal offering Incense is an abomination for me, whether it's Rosh Chodesh or Shabbos or other important occasions. I cannot abide evil in assembly. This is stinging rebuke. My soul loathes your Rosh Chodesh and your festivals. They're a burden for me. I have wearied of dealing with them. And so here, Yeshaya articulates a well-known idea in the Navi in several places in Yeshaya and other Nevi'im, that the Corbanos are meaningless without something else. And because the Jewish people lack that, are lacking in another way, these Corbanos are vain and insincere and worthless to Hashem. This is the message that Moshe is giving implicitly. The Navi Yeshaya is making it explicitly. That the Corbanos have to be understood in a certain way. And if they're misunderstood, Hashem doesn't want them. Hashem rejects them. And that's why Moshe leaves them out of the book of Devarim in order to send a nuanced message about Corbanos. But we have to be careful, because there is something else that Moshe does emphasize in Seifer Devarim that relates somewhat to the Corbanos. Now, we have to make another observation, because not only are the Corbanos left out, but there's something else that's left out as well, and that is the Mishkan. Just think about how much psukim are spent describing the construction and the setting up and the use, the inauguration of the Mishkan, and it's all left out. The entire second half of the book of Shemos is the construction of the Mishkan. Into Vayikra, with the description of the Corbanos, you then get the dedication of the Mishkan. And who's not allowed to go there? And then in Seifer Bamidbar, when the Jewish people begin to travel away from Har Sinai, a great deal of psukim are spent on how the Mishkan is going to be transferred and how the Mishkan is going to travel and who's responsible for the Mishkan. There is so much material in the Torah that revolves around the Mishkan. Nearly all of it is absent from Seifer Devarim. But what's interesting is what is left in Seifer Devarim. Because when you skip to Parshas Re'eh, you find a phrase that is repeated over and over again, which we already made a subtle reference to, and that is as follows. If you turn to chapter 12, Perek Yud Beis in Seifer Devarim, it's page 1015 in the Steinsaltz, and in the Art Scroll, it's page 998 at the bottom. Another warning. Again, the word chayim, for you to thrive, for you to live on the land. Destroy all of the places. All the places where Avodah Zarah existed, you need to destroy them. And he goes into detail about what should be destroyed. Skip to verse 4, Pasuk Dalid. Lo sasun kein laHashem Elokechem, but not do as such to Hashem. The way that the Avodah Zarah was worshipped, that you should not do to Hashem. Actually, go back one pasuk, because there's an important phrase. The end of pasuk Gimel, Vibadtem es shema min hamakom hahu. You should destroy their name from this place. Lo sasun kein laHashem Elokechem. Why? Ki im el hamakom asher yivchar Hashem Elokechem v'kol shivtechem lo asum es shemosham l'shichno sidrushu uvasa shama. Because to the place that I will choose from among all your tribes to place my name, lasum es shemosham l'shichno sidrushu uvasa shama, for Hashem's presence there you shall seek out and go there. V'havesem shama olosechem v'zivchechem pasuk vav. And you will bring your korbanos. Remember, those korbanos, which were all left out, are referred to here. This is one of the only times that they're referred to, essentially. All your different kinds of offerings, pasuk Zion, verse 7. And you will eat them there before Hashem. Right? So this is the first of many instances throughout Parshas Re'eh and beyond where it refers to the Makom Asher Yivchar Hashem Lasun Es Shemo Sham, the place that Hashem chooses to place His name, which is fascinating because here the whole construction, everything involved with the Mishkan is left out, but the Beis HaMikdash, which is the continuation of the Mishkan, is emphasized in a very particular context as the place where Hashem will make His name manifest, to the exclusion of all the other places. Right? You destroy all the other places of Avodah Zarah, and you replace them with one place, and that's the place where you worship Hashem. So how do we understand? How do we understand, on the one hand, leaving out all the Corbanos and the Mishkan from Seifer Devarim, but at the same time, identifying that one place where worship is going to take place, that one place where we're going to worship Hashem? What are we supposed to understand by this, by leaving out all this stuff but placing very, very laser-focused emphasis on this one place? And I think the idea is that we need to recognize that in the phrase Makom Asher Yivchar Hashem, more important than the Makom is the Yivchar Hashem. It's the fact that Hashem chose it. Hashem chose to make His presence manifest in this place. And it's because Hashem chose it, that's what gives it its significance. And that's why we have to go there, right? To go seek out His presence, to be closer to Hashem. We go to the place that Hashem chooses, not the place that we choose, but the place that Hashem chooses. And so the idea of de-emphasizing the Corbanos and looking at the Navi Yeshaya, who says that Hashem doesn't even want our Corbanos, it's the same idea, right? It's not the place that's important. It's the fact that Hashem chose the place that it's important. It's not the animals that are important. It's not the Corbanos that it's important. It's the fact that Hashem commanded the Corbanos. And the Corbanos lose all their meaning if you're not following Hashem's commandments. If you're not following all Hashem's commandments, the Corbanos lose their meaning. If you're not, again, the Makom Asher Yivchar Hashem is important not because it's a Makom, but because Hashem chose it. The Corbanos are important not because Corbanos are important, but because Hashem commanded them. And if you're not following the mitzvahs, if you're not following the warnings that enable you to thrive in the land, then the Corbanos become unimportant. And that's why Moshe leaves them out. Because it's not the Corbanos that are important, it's following the mitzvos, following the word of Hashem to enable you to stay on the land that's important. If you're not following those mitzvos and you're still bringing Corbanos, then you miss the whole point. And so let's go back to the beginning of Parshas Vaeschanan, because back in the beginning, Perek Daled, Pasuk Lamed Vav, is a very important formulation. It's page 975 in the Steinsaltz. In the Art Scroll, it is page 964 towards the bottom. Because remember, this is Moshe's setup for all these warnings. He's framing the concepts. And what does he say in Pasuk Lamed Vav in verse 36? Ina shamayim hishmiacha es kolo liasreka. Val haaretz heracha es yisho hagdola udvarav shamata mitocha eish. Hashem made His voice heard from the heavens. Where is Hashem? Hashem is really in the heavens. Right? We're going to build a Beis HaMikdash. We're going to have a place. But that's just a place for us to meet Hashem. Hashem's not necessarily in the Beis HaMikdash. I don't want to get into that philosophical issue of to what extent Hashem is in the Beis HaMikdash. But here Moshe is emphasizing that we've heard the voice of Hashem from Shamayim. And on the earth, Hashem showed you His great fire, but it's His words that you heard from the fire. It's His words that you heard. And so it's the visual, it's the it's the tactile, it's that we can embrace, which is only a means towards a greater message. The building of the Beis HaMikdash, the actual edifice, the actual construction, is only a means to come closer to Hashem. It's not the goal in and of itself. The Corbanos are a means to come closer to Hashem. They're not a goal in and of itself. And if you're not observing the mitzvahs properly, then you're still bringing Corbanos, then you're missing the point of the Corbanos. You're turning the Corbanos into an end in and of themselves when really they're a means. So both the Beis Hamikdash and the Corbanos are means to come closer to Hashem, and so that's why they are de-emphasized, or they are omitted from the retelling of the Torah, from Seifer Devarim. We leave out the whole Mishkan description. We leave out the detailed description of the Corbanos, because more important than the Beis Hamikdash and the Corbanos is the fact that Hashem commanded them. Hashem commanded them with Devarim. It was an auditory experience. And so listening to those Devarim, following those Devarim, that's the most important thing. That's the key to retaining possession in the land of Israel. That's what Moshe is trying to emphasize over and over again. And so that's the real driving principle of his entire speech, Seifer Devarim in general. And in fact, if you take a look at one of the more famous parts of Parshas Vaeschanan, it becomes even more clear, and that is the Shema. If you turn to Perek Vav Pasuk Daled, Perek Vav Pasuk Daled can be found on page 972 in the Art Scroll, page 983 in the Steinsaltz. Look what it says, and this is what we recite as our credo, right? This is what we recite as our expression of faith every single day. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, auditory. And what should you do when you hear? Right? You should love Hashem completely. These Devarim, that auditory experience, the message, the commandment of Hashem, that should be on you, on your heart. And you should repeat them or sharpen them for your children. And we talked about the significance of that word in the last class, right? When you, wherever you are, you should speak of them. These Devarim are critical. The Devarim that they heard on Har Sinai are critical. They are what will carry us through life. They are what will enable us to thrive in the land of Israel. And that's Moshe's primary message here in Seifer Devarim. So when we go back to the beginning of Vaeschanan, and we look at that pasuk that I emphasized before, it's just amazing, right? Perek Daled pasuk Yud Beis. Perek Daled pasuk Yud Beis, page 971 in the Steinsaltz, page 960 in the Art Scroll. Pasuk Yud Beis, right? Vayidaber Hashem alechem mitoch ha'esh kol devarim atem shomim usmuna einchem roim zulasi kol. Right? You heard a kol devarim. You heard a voice of devarim, of words. You did not see any image aside from that kol, aside from that voice. So that just drives home even more this concept of devarim, and what the Jewish people are supposed to take away in order to remain in the land of Israel. So just to sum up, I used some observations from Professor Micha Goodman's excellent book on Seifer Devarim to show that omitting the Corbanos and the Beis Hamikdash is an attempt by Moshe to focus the Jewish people on what will truly enable them to remain in the land of Israel, which is fidelity to the Torah, listening to Hashem, not worshiping Avodah Zarah, not worshiping anything tangible, but maintaining those Devarim, maintaining those words, those commandments, that adherence to Hashem's word. That is what will enable the Jewish people to thrive. And that is what happens once we look at the Navi and Chazal. That's exactly what happens. What Moshe's warning, unfortunately, his admonitions and his warnings do come true, the negative sides of them, and that is what takes us into the day of Tisha B'Av, which is the tragic result of missing the message of Seifer Devarim. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Have a great day. We're going to go on hiatus. I'm sorry to report. We're going to go on hiatus for a little bit. We'll be back the first week of Elul, which I believe is the first week of, not the first week, it's the end of August. But watch your emails. We'll send out the exact details, but we'll be on hiatus for the next few weeks until Elul. All right, have a great day, everybody, and have a easy and meaningful fast over Tisha B'Av.